Hi everybody, welcome to this session, which I think is the perfect antidote to the post-lunch dip. We're going to be tackling some fairly weighty questions, and I've got a panel of experts to help me do that. And I'll introduce them in a second, but a bit about why this topic is so important to me. I would normally say to you that I'm the editor-in-chief of Reach plc Regional's digital operation, but at the moment I'm not. I'm publisher of Laudable, which is a joint project between Reach and JPIMedia, who would traditionally be viewed as a rival publisher, to investigate and explore opportunities around building audiences and new platforms, specifically audio, for local news in kind of underserved communities. So I'm going to be taking copious amounts of notes from the experts here who are going to talk about how they are growing audience or future-proofing their newsrooms. So let me introduce the people on the stage with me. I have sitting next to me, probably quite a few of you know, Sarah Brown, who is the head of news partnerships for Facebook UK and Ireland. Sarah's former journalist, ex-BBC, ex-Al Jazeera England, yep, and also CNN, and I have to say, works really closely with our newsrooms and very much understands the demands and pressures of any modern-day news operation. Next to Sarah, we have Christian Broughton, editor of The Independent. Kind of man and boy, I think, at The Independent. Started from university, yep, worked your way up, now editor, and overseeing massive expansion in the UK and the US, and also kind of not so much digitising, but actually monetising platforms. Yeah, I'll get you to talk a bit more about that in a bit, I think. Next to Christian, we have Lucy Kueng, who is, Professor Lucy Kueng, just known to me as Lucy usually, sorry, who is the Senior Research Fellow at Reuters Institute at Oxford and an absolute expert in culture change, leadership, technology transition in newsrooms, and I'm really excited that you were able to come and be a part of this panel today. Then we have Keith Poole from The Sun. He's your digital editor at The Sun and joined just after the paywall came down. So you've been really responsible for managing and growing an entirely different kind of audience to what the previous strategy was, which must have been quite a challenge. And then finally, on the end, practically his own country, we have Yorkshire's James Mitchinson from the Yorkshire Post, editorial director for JPI Yorkshire, who is never a man who's afraid to voice an opinion, and probably is well known to a lot of you from his conversations with people on Twitter about how the world works. So it's lovely to have you all here today. I'd like to start, because it's such a big topic and it breaks down for different people on this panel in different ways. So I thought it'd be really good to get every panel member to just talk a little bit briefly about what specifically the topic of either audience building or future-proofing the newsroom means to them. And I know Lucy's been doing a great deal of research around future-proofing and change, so we'll get an insight into that. And then we'll go into some questions, and then I'll throw it open to the floor. So, without further ado, I may as well go down the line. Sarah, would you like to go first?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So, I think to kind of take that step back and give the broader context of how Facebook and how the Facebook Media Partnerships team works with news organisations, it's very much around how to best give an experience, the best experience possible, both for publishers and for people on Facebook. So we're all about ensuring that experience for them is as good as possible. And there are probably, to that end, the two key areas that we focus on and the three parts of that. The two key areas is one around working with publishers around viable business models. And number two, and I think also within the context of this panel, is very much around how we can work with publishers across the country and, of course, beyond, although my remit is UK and Ireland, how we can work with you to best connect you to the audiences that matter the most to you and get your content in front of them as much as possible. So the three kind of areas that we've really focused on, that I've really focused on in my kind of 4.5 years at Facebook, the first thing has been around the programmes that we've run. I think most of you here would probably know the Community News Project, For example, some of you here are very much involved in it. This is something we launched actually a year ago this month, where we have put more than 80 journalists in local newsrooms across the country to report on the news that matters to those local communities most. I actually spoke with Nancy Fielder earlier, and she mentioned Geeta, one of the community news reporters who is part of the programme. Geeta is from the Roma community and, has been able to bring stories to the fore about the Roma community for her community that, in a way that's just not really been able to be done before. So programmes like that, are very important to us, and we want to continue working with them. The second bit is around product. So how do we work with the people in this room to develop the products that mean the most to you? Now, from a monetization perspective, that's everything from things like instant articles, which again, some in this room are using, on this panel indeed. It's things like ad breaks for video, it's branded content, and it's increasingly actually subscriptions. So people who are looking at subscription models, I think James and I were chatting about before, how can we work with partners who are using subscription models in a way that can be seamlessly integrated with our platform, because then you can connect whole different and whole new and exciting audiences for you. Then there's things like the breaking news button that you can put on news stories that we're currently testing and slowly rolling out. And this was very much a product that we got feedback from publishers was something that they wanted to do. If you want to have a signal of a breaking news story on Facebook, then a breaking news flag is a great way to do that. And so we produced something, I've been trialling it, and it's been doing very well. And then finally, probably one of the most important things, and particularly within the context of the UK election that we now have a vote in this country again, is around integrity and combating misinformation, disinformation. So there are the 35,000 people that we've hired in the past year to work on safety and security alone. There's the fact-checking programme, the third-party fact-checking programme that we've launched. We've gone from, I think, 4 countries in 2016 to, I believe, more than 50 now in 40 different languages, more than 40 different languages, actually, that's now running. And obviously, there's a lot of the work we're doing around combating engagement bait, combating clickbait, and really ensuring that the news on our platform, as much as possible, is quality news and is stuff that can be discovered and put in front of the audiences that matter the most to you. So I think those are the areas that we've, in the past 4.5 years, I've certainly been at Facebook, and hopefully future years as well, and what we're kind of focusing on. And I think within the context of this panel, that's very much what we want to continue to be working on with publishers in kind.
Thank you, Sarah. Christian.
So it is just over 3 years since the Independent took a big leap of faith and we closed our print operation, sold the Eye, and doubled down on the Independent as a digital news publisher. It was pretty risky, but we come from a corporate culture where we take risks from time to time with the launch of Eye, for instance, or even back then it was quite controversial to go from broadsheet to compact. So it came from a kind of ethos of, we like doing these things. The truth is we had to do it because we just didn't believe in the future of that business model, funding the Independent and powering up the Independent for years to come. And it's gone really well. We were immediately profitable. Audiences kept growing. And we're here 3 years on doing double-digit growth on revenue and audience within profit. We're still, we've pleased to see the recent award nominations come in. We're still signed off a check recently or a cash advance, I should say, for one of our 2 Middle East-based reporters, one of our 2 Beirut-based reporters to go on a reporting mission in Syria soon. So we're still doing serious journalism, and it's working. And the really exciting thing for me is that I think this has happened probably at some point in the last 12 months. I can't quite pinpoint the time. I should have taken, I wish I could work this out. But at some point in the last year, the whole internal shift of where we are has been defined more about where we're going to than where we've come from. The closure of print was a really big step to take. And I guess in the first year of that, you hear a lot of conversations that are about making sense of something. Now we don't have the paper. And it cropped up a lot. And then it kind of went a little bit quieter. And now people genuinely are talking about what do we do now? Because we've got to that point of comfort and confidence in what we're doing and what we're about. And we can just see some really big potential in the future. So I hope that's good news for everyone, because I'm sure that it will inevitably happen to other publishers too. And there's still a kind of big fear factor around it. It's not easy, but I think the future for now is, it's looking very, very exciting.
And I think, Lucy, what Kristen was saying about the enormous upheaval that will inevitably have gone on in your newsroom as you pushed to a new business model and you changed the way that you operate, that's kind of writ large, but it's something that you've seen in a lot of newsrooms as they are trying to grapple with culture change and where people fit within that, and how you carry a newsroom into the future business models.
Yeah, I mean, it's a once-in-a-century shift this industry is going through. And, I mean, you sort of suggested we come up with data points that can really inspire action. And what I research is really the boring, unsexy part of this business, which is actually how organisations need to change, how the kind of transformation inside organisations to ensure that this industry has a kind of sustainable future. And what's really been clear from the last piece of research and the current one is just how exhausted newsrooms are. I mean, you're coming off really nearly 2 decades of constant change in reaction to battering from the external environment. You're structurally weakened, revenues under pressure, finances straightened as a result. Very hard to keep a close link to who audiences are. And for me, one of the interesting things about future-proofing that I think has maybe been a little bit under-indexed in this kind of miasma of change has been really putting a lot of investment in the people in the organisation. Because actually, if you look at this sector, the real competitive advantage you have that other sectors would kill for is the calibre of your people. I mean, not just the intellectual abilities, but also their commitment. I think is really rare. So the trick is to really try to kind of use that as a kind of competitive weapon, as a structural weapon. But, and actually it's very interesting, if you look at the top editors in companies that are performing kind of disproportionately well, how many of those are devoting the bulk of their time to, shaping the culture, getting the right talent on board, making sure the teams function as they should, which is really not what they signed up for. If you look at the people, the kind of standout issue from this current piece of research is this whole issue around millennials, which I think was not something I was looking for, but it's kind of come up and hit me in the face. With the previous research, the equivalent issue was actually burnout. But on this one, what's interesting is there is a intergenerational tension thing happening in a lot of newsrooms. And it's really clear millennials do tick differently. But one of the impacts that's having is they are kind of collectively insisting on a different way of leadership from their bosses. On the good side, on the negative side, perhaps first, they want lots of mentoring, they want lots of feedback, they want lots of progress. They don't tend to stay long, but kind of on the positive side, they are very value-driven. They've got an enormous sense of purpose. So I think in terms of future-proofing, one of the tricks is to understand these people are actually the path to growth. They are the path to audiences you don't have now. So one of the challenges is kind of synthesizing leadership approaches so that you're kind of building on the strengths of those. And then I think in terms of leadership, the other thing that's really hitting is the organisations that are performing well have found a way to kind of trace a link from the kind of high-level strategy, this is what we're trying to do, to how do people on the ground need to change what they do every day. And in fact, if you talk to people like the Washington Post, okay, Jeff Bezos brought enormous amounts of money and runway and tech skills and could fly, Boeings over from Seattle with developers, but what's really interesting there is he's managed to give everyone in that organisation a sense of a kind of boiled down set of principles that really guides everyday decision making. And I think that's really the challenge for leaders right now. It's finding a story and then tracing a link. And I think the other kind of big message is with this really, it's so easy to leave this kind of organisational transformation as kind of items 7, 8 and 9 on the to-do list because it's all so difficult. But there are really such huge kind of sustainability benefits in focusing on these kind of very grinding issues around making sure you've got the right talent, making sure your leadership is really what people need and really taking care of the culture. So I think that's kind of the message, and the work I'm doing now is trying to flesh out how to do that. And it's very difficult because this is not a sector that has really traditionally prioritised management. It's almost, someone at NPR said to me, even the managers have an anti-managerial ethic in this place. And people are very allergic to management jargon. I mean, understandably, journalists, one of the things they own is language. So one has to be very careful and thoughtful about how this is presented. But I do think one of the things about future proofing is building up the management muscle and the strategic muscle and being more inclusive, building on the kind of smarts of the entire organisation.
Thank you.
So, hi everybody. So the Sun is 50 this month, but also, as Alison said, it's 4 years since we came out of the paywall, and it's been an enormous period of transformation for the Sun digitally. I'd like to talk a bit about the transformation and the effect of bringing data into the newsroom and how it's really guided our growth and our increasing engagement. You know, we all know that what is doing well today can challenge your journalistic instincts day to day, but also it's really allowed us to get close to the reader and build a completely unique audience to what is the stereotypical Sun audience. Most of our audience now is female, aged 18 to 34. And it's really allowed us to concentrate and focus our editorial strategy and the stories that we do on the areas where we know that we are really connecting with people. I think often in digital, it's what you don't do rather than what you do that gets you ahead. When we first came out of the paywall, we were behind most national newspapers in traffic, obviously. And the first goal was to gain reach, which is to touch as many people in the UK with a story at least once a month. It took us a few years to get there, and now it's all about engagement. And engagement, again, is one of those words in digital where I think that it has many different meanings to many different people. But I think by bringing into the newsroom a audience development team, which is largely, in many other media organisations, either run by the tech department because they do techie things, or the marketing department because they traditionally are there, the people who own the audience. What we've really been able to do is bring our reader much, much closer to the reporters and journalists and really sort of turn them into human algorithms about knowing what people really want to read in the tone that they want to read. And the net effect of doing this is that engagement is page views to most people, but what we're really trying to build is an emotional engagement. And because we've been able to say no to a lot of things, and also, let's face it, that page views aren't of all of equal value. Anybody could write inappropriate stories and get a lot of page views. What we're really interested in is the emotional engagement with the reader and the things that they really stick to and drive loyalty to our brand. So the net effect as well has been that we publish 20% fewer stories every 24-hour period, but our traffic has grown by multiples of that over the last couple of years. And it's allowed our newsrooms to have the freedom to invest in original journalism, so whether that be exclusives, which the Sun's known for, which we publish online, whether it be features around certain topics that we know people are most interested in. We've launched 9 campaigns over the last 2 years. It's been able to give us that focus as well in specialist areas like Love Island. Everybody's watched it this year. 2 years ago, we were on it and we saw everybody was crazy into it, for instance. Or even we launched a cocaine awareness campaign earlier this year, and we saw a huge pickup in traffic for that because, it's not just a middle-class drug. It's been done everywhere now, and it's in every town and city, and it's affordable for everybody. And that was an awareness campaign and not a lecturing campaign. So for me, it's about what you don't do is as important as what you do in a newsroom when you're undergoing transformation.
James.
If you'll humour me for a minute, I think I'd like to just go back to 2007. It's just been said that we faced a period, 2 decades of unprecedented change and pressure, and 2007 being that moment when Steve Jobs unveiled that little thing called the iPhone, and with it the capability for the platforms, 2007 being the year that Twitter and Facebook were both launched. And that was a real leveller, and it meant that publishers and newspapers in particular suddenly were not the privileged owners and purveyors of news and information. They were, if you like, unleashed upon us a tsunami of micro publishers who were the CEOs of their own publishing business, and suddenly we had competitors in back bedrooms in the regional news as well as traditional rivalries with people like Reach and Co. And to suddenly get the sort of the computing power of the Apollo space mission in the palm of everybody's hand, that really was the moment when we as regional publishers and regional journalists had to up our game. But what it did give us, and I think on one of the previous panels, there was one of the panelists suggested that with hindsight, perhaps we might have laid the law down to the platforms about how they could and couldn't use our content. But I think whether or not that would have been the right thing to do is irrelevant. We're now in a position where the platforms give the portfolio for which I'm responsible a following of 1.6 million likes and followers across the network of titles I'm responsible for. And with the 100 journalists that I have and I'm able to call upon, that reach, that power and the ability to coordinate a single message across a social network like that and point it towards our own real estate, that I think is something that we really do benefit from, and the platforms really give us a new sense of the potential of our brands. So, for example, if you'll humour me again, the Power Up the North campaign that is a multi-publisher campaign that has genuinely received positive traction with policymakers in central government. That wouldn't have been possible, I don't think, 10 years ago. We wouldn't have collaborated, we would have continued to compete, and I don't think we would have been able to transmit the message as effectively as we can today. So when it comes to building an audience, since 2007, we have built a variety of social accounts that we can interlink and interlock. And so that 1.6 million following we can use to channel at a single story at any given time. So the strategic thinking when it comes to amplifying a message for a humble, small, regional title like ours, we're never going to have the page view power of the Mirror, which I think it was said was 14 million page views a day. But we are still able to generate 1.2 million page views a day across Yorkshire, and with our colleagues when we collaborate, even more so. I would just like to pick up on the people piece, though, in terms of future-proofing the newsroom, and I'm really pleased that we're talking about equipping people, because I think it's important that at this moment in time, as we look forward, what do we do next? We mustn't lose sight of the fact that future-proofing our newsrooms, yes, we need the advanced content management systems, we need the intuitive, effective technology, we need all of those things, but you can't capex in culture, you can't buy in culture, you have to cultivate culture, you have to work on it, you have to invest in it. And I'm really pleased to hear that sort of, if we are going to future-proof our newsrooms, we really do have to invest in the leadership and invest in the recruitment. And I think if there's a soundbite that I can leave in the room to take away today, I think that cultivation of a constructive, effective culture in the newsroom starts before the journalists even get to the newsrooms. And we as an industry have to be more proactive in working with the further and higher education institutions to really create syllabus and curricula that export the right kind of journalists. And I think it was Jane from BuzzFeed said earlier, people who can scrape data, can film video, can edit it on the fly. And I think Jane went through about 6 or 7 different things that we need journalists to do before she reached copy. So we have to understand what we need to pay that person who can do all of those things, and we have to help the training institutions to deliver to us the kind of people that are able to hit the newsroom and upskill the rest of us.
Perfect, thank you. So you see, it's like a massive topic to unpack this.
Yeah.
I could spend all afternoon talking about it. In fact, but Ian would kill me. So I'm going to do some quick-fire questions now. Christian, let's talk about priorities when it comes to audience. Niche or mass? What is your driver?
I think you've got to do 2 things. You've got to work out what your brand's really all about, what the independent stands for in our case, and you've got to absolutely stick to that. Thereafter, I think you need to leave some room to experiment. So we do this thing from time to time. We've just done a recent round of it, actually, partly with a focus on our US team. So I went out to see our newsroom in New York and sat around with the people there, and we worked out, let them work out, really, in their words, what they felt the independent really stands for. And obviously I'm there to make sure it's guided and basically, lines up with everything that we're doing in the UK as well. So, this isn't just about news subjects. So we did, for instance, Trump 2020 obviously is going to be a massive news subject. Climate, huge for The Independent, only going to get a bigger subject. Identity is another one that was really very much highlighted. But also attributes and values. So, we're a progressive news brand. We're pretty fired up about things. We're very active. We like to get people out on the streets, final say marches, that kind of thing. And we're hopeful because we believe that, we're empowering people to change and to inspire change. So those things have got to be lasting and those things have got to be there, whatever we do. Whether then somebody wants to say, hey, can we do a great TV streaming coverage channel or let's campaign for voter registration, that's great. So you can allow some room for experimentation as long as those values are really crisp and clear. It really pays dividends because editors, long gone are the times when editors can kind of read page proofs. In my last job on the paper side of things, I was night editor. And it was great. You just felt like you had all the control because everyone who resent a page would come and put a nice big A3 proof on your desk and you'd be on top of everything. Try reading every tweet, Instagram post, Facebook post. I mean, it's not possible. So you have to do a lot of work, I think, to make sure that everyone who's making a decision, so that's every junior journalist up, knows what they're in it for. It's very motivational to get to the point about culture. It's why people get involved in journalism in the first place. And it guides all those decisions. And suddenly you find that people are doing amazing things that you weren't even in the conversation for. You get really surprised by, God, that's exactly what I wanted to see our team doing. And why wasn't I told about this? But it's wonderful to see people absolutely nail what you want without having had to do that kind of, specific brief.
Thank you. And Keith, you mentioned Love Island. Obviously did massive traffic, also for the Mirror. We've got Love Island Winter starting. We've got I'm a Celebrity starting. You're fishing in the same pool as a lot of other brands. How do you find and hold a loyal audience as opposed to the ones who are just like drift net fishing for whatever they can get?
Well, I think both the Mirror and the Sun should be competing over shows like that. I think it's when other brands try and come into our pond that perhaps they see all of the they see the potential traffic there. I think from our point of view, talking to the audience development point, we have many different audiences on many different platforms, from our homepage to our social following and our Facebook pages or Twitter or on Google as well. And I think once you get an understanding of your audiences on different platforms, you then understand which topics coalesce and everybody's interested in on every platform, because it's not actually right that everybody's interested in the same thing among your different audiences. People talk about print and digital audiences, but actually we have many different audiences across all of our platforms. That's your question.
No, it does, and actually it needs me neatly, as if you'd almost planned it to Sarah, because I wanted to just talk about, right, from a platform point of view, you have your audiences. How do you serve the news users of the platform, so ourselves as publishers using it, we all get enormous traffic from it and have desires of what we would want Facebook to deliver versus what your kind of general users, your non-news people who use it to keep in touch with each other and kind of share and post pictures and stuff. How do you manage those two very different demands?
No, that's a good question. So I think our newsfeed values on our platform, the number one thing is one of the main things is friends and family, which is what people came to the platform very much to come for. They wanted content from their friends and family. However, we increasingly became, a very powerful repository for people to get the news that matters the most to them. And also people share a lot of news on Facebook. So working with publishers is obviously incredibly important in order to best ensure that quality news content is getting in front of the right audiences. So when we work with publishers in the room, on this panel and beyond, it's about how can we best meet your needs when it comes to that audience piece. So the other part is that, we have a lot of people on Facebook who are very engaged news users. And I think the news tab was something that we mentioned earlier. You may have read about, we have launched in the US a test around a separate news surface within the Facebook Blue app. So it's a whole different part. It's not part of newsfeed, it's separate. And this will be, the top part is curated by human beings, the rest of it is personalised and algorithmic. And we are testing this as an independent service because we know from our research that a lot of people on Facebook want to see more news, but they want to see a broader spectrum of news. I think it's really interesting that you brought up Love Island as an example. I didn't know about Love Island Winter, by the way. This is a whole new world for me.
Prefer to lose your
because people often will look at things like Love Island Winter and say it's soft, it's fluffy, it's not important. Actually, those kind of topics bring up very interesting issues around mental health, around interactions around gender politics, which audiences clearly like to consume. So when we look at the news tab, it's very important to think about giving as broad a kind of spectrum as news as possible, whether it's tech or environment, science, etc. So one of the reasons we're testing this is that we feel there's an audience for it, but also we feel it's another way for publishers to get their news in front of their audiences. So it's a very small test. It is US only. We are planning, hopefully, to expand it. I'm sure a question will come, but at the moment, nothing around the UK yet. But it's an example of something that we're thinking about in terms of that partnership between publishers and between the audience and getting the content that they want the most in front of them.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm going to talk about future-proofing a bit. And I'll come to you first, James, then I've got a question for you, Lucy, which I think spins out of what I'm going to ask you to talk about, which is your search for a female sports editor and the difficulties you encountered.
Yeah, so one of my personal priorities, and to be fair, it has to be said, one of the priorities of the company is to diversify the newsrooms such that they reflect the communities they serve. And I will state unequivocally that there is absolutely miles and miles of progress needs to be made before we can look ourselves in the mirror and declare a satisfactory job has been done. But in order to cut through the sort of white noise on social media and get a reaction, there was, I did a very carefully crafted, specifically worded tweet to gain some attention, having previously advertised for a chief football writer for Leeds United in our centre. Bear with me. We received about 60 applications for the first advert, which went in Press Gazette, Hold the Front Page, various different trade outlets. We received no applications from a female applicant at all. And we did have one application from a 13-year-old boy who was a Leeds fan, by the way. And I remember standing in the newsroom, as editors do, loudly swearing and saying, so a 13-year-old boy thinks he can do this job, but we've not had a single application from a woman to do the job. A few days later, sadly, that bloody The Athletic pinched my other chief football writer. And so second advert had to be crafted for a chief football writer for the Yorkshire Post as opposed to the Yorkshire Evening Post. And so the tweet that I put out was, as a boy, I would have dreamed of getting this job, and I would have, as happens, I'd like a girl to have it. So the context was there. You could see the, how the tweet was engineered. Two things happened. I'm pleased to say, first of all, we got a number of applications from women who believed they could do the job. As you might expect, I detached myself from the recruitment process and let an independent panel do the recruitment process as per. But I also, I think I shared with you in a conversation, Alison, I almost got a taste of what it's like to be a woman on Twitter. The amount of abuse I received for even daring to have the temerity to advertise a job in a way that was articulated to attempt to begin the rebalancing of the newsroom. It wouldn't even be it would have been a start. But the amount of abuse and vitriol and privilege and all of those other horrible things that social media is famed for does a lot of good as well, by the way, I hasten to add.
Thank you. Got that in just in time.
I'm a fairly hardy character, and I was quite shocked, actually.
Yeah, I saw some of the replies, and people just didn't react well to the idea that you were looking for something beyond what you currently had in your newsroom. And that's actually what I wanted to come to you about, which is when we are trying to find people who aren't currently in our newsrooms, how do we, like millennials, we talk a lot about diversity and changing the makeup of leadership and what. How do we help these people who come into our newsrooms feel like it's a place that they can be themselves in and are welcome and don't have to change or adapt?
Yeah, I think it's a big issue. And one of the things we're trying to do here is attack a very long-term problem with very short-term measures. And so it's always going to be a bit dysfunctional and we're not going to get to where we need to. But it's interesting, if you talk to people at a diversity inclusion piece, what's really interesting amongst the more thoughtful people is that they do see this as not only a good thing per se, but the route to growth. There are good business arguments behind it. And what's interesting, if you look around the world, people are looking for different. So in America, the inclusion piece is very much about race. In the UK, it's quite a lot about gender. Increasingly, everywhere, it's becoming social class and backgrounds. In Scandinavia, they're very hot on getting kind of ethnic backgrounds balanced. I think the trick is distinguishing between. It's not just diversity; it's inclusion. I mean, once they're in the newsrooms, how integrated are they? And then you get into these cultural issues about how do discussions take place? How are meetings? It gets very granular. I've sat in on a lot of journalistic processes, and what you see is it tends to be the kind of the big beast, the defenders of the big, legacy beats or whatever tend to have the largest voices, and we've sort of got schooled into that. There's a whole work around just ensuring that those discussions are more inclusive, and how do we make sure that those people can take part? Because if you look at actually the people that get excluded in the discussions, and it's not done with any intention, it just seems to happen. They tend to be often people who represent minorities, they're people who represent new areas, digital and data. And actually from a business point of view, it's very dangerous that these voices are getting screened out. So I think it goes right down, this is the nuts and bolts of actually how meetings take place in the organisation, how inclusive decisions are, and discussions are. So I think it does really then go into the culture piece and how the leadership functions and the kind of cultural values you're working with, which are very difficult things to correct. I mean, culture is this strange mixture of, it's very ethereal, but if you want to change it, you've got to be pretty forensic. What are exactly the new values we want to implant in this newsroom, and what are the ones we want to move away from, and then look pretty in a pretty systematic way at how we move towards that shift.
I'd like to stand up for millennials, actually, because I'm in awe of some of the people that we employ. I mean, Jonathan Grun's over there, and when I was sort of the age of many people in our newsroom now, I worked for PA, and a good job was maybe filing 2 stories or 2 takes for the PA main wire, and then, job done. Nowadays, if I was the same age now, I'd be expected to be reporter, picture editor, video editor, SEO editor, fill out a checklist of about 40 things, make sure the tags are correct, and then publish it probably, with very little checking. Obviously, if you work for a newspaper, you can file your copy and it goes through a system of checks, but you're often then publishing it to millions of people, and that responsibility is on you. And a lot of the pressure that you're talking about that's put on, particularly at the sharper digital end of newsrooms these days, is something that does make you think.
I think that is also journalism as well. I mean, speaking just as a former journalist now, not as Facebook, but that, Kamal made an interesting comment in his panel earlier on where he said, they're so busy, they're doing Facebook Lives, they're doing this, they're doing that, where's the time for journalism? And my point was, that is journalism. It's just journalism on different platforms, to different audiences and different forms. And to Keith's point, I don't even use the word millennials. I feel it's a catch-all term for just the younger people sometimes, of which I am, of course, one. So I think, it's important to recognise, yes, it's very much changed from that perspective, and they have to have more skills as a result. I think also your point around really integrating that piece around diversity throughout the newsroom is very important. I think when I started out as a journalist, that's an HR thing. HR deal with that. They've got ideas. They're the ones that put that together. And I think nowadays, as you say, there's a sense of, no, this culture has to come from within. The company I work for has a very mission-driven culture, and it has a very inclusive culture, and that has come from the top down, and it's come from all the way through. So I think that's important too.
Just to land another point, so I completely agree with you about, people castigate millennials. It's kind of the big, insult. I wish I was a millennial. I think we need to put a bit of fun back in our industry as well, because all these different platforms that we've got, you know, the Facebook Lives, the live blogs that we do, the podcast series we can just launch if we have an idea and have a little huddle in the canteen and get it going, and don't tell Christian because, you know, we just want to get this thing done and, you know, we'll find out later. That's great. That's amazing. You know, yes, I know, you know, I'm fully aware that it's a very difficult industry, particularly for people starting out, particularly for people affording London rents, if you work for a London-based publisher. I'm very aware of all the difficulties, so I don't want to be disrespectful about those because they are very real. But there's also, you know, the upsides are brilliant. I mean, the upsides now are fantastic. I mean, hearing you describe, you know, 2 takes for the PA wire, that's what it was. Yeah. You know, look at what it is now. The flexibility of newsrooms. You know, we have people who are leader writers who write about Love Island because they get sucked into Love Island and they want to bring out different issues to the kind of coverage that your titles would give it. And we give them space to do that. So I think that one of the issues about our newsrooms now with data completely believe in building things around data. Everything's got to be informed. It can save you so many mistakes if you just listen to the numbers. But we kind of create this sort of KPI soup for ourselves as well. We talk about unique browsers. We talk about page views per browser. We talk about engaged time. We've got a whole other bunch as well because we're running a kind of premium service alongside a free service. So we talk about, you know, the split of, you know, a subscriber split between reading paywall content versus not. So many numbers that come at people. But what we're fundamentally doing is journalism. And we've got readers and we build close relationships with our readers. And that's pretty much the same as a local paper from, you know, 20 years ago. You know, you've got to have a great relationship with your community. Okay, maybe some of that relationship now between reporters and the community plays out on Twitter. Or maybe it's because somebody starts a podcast and they get some very direct feedback. But there's a lot of romance still left in our industry. There's a lot of passion in there. And there's a lot of kind of emotional buy-in that has to happen, I think. And if you can manage that side of it, and if you can make it fun, even when you're, you know, you have to support audience numbers and you have to do all those things to make a business work. I mean, you know, we had that in print as well. We were always chasing readership numbers then. It's not that different. But I end up in a lot of these conversations and they take on quite a kind of dour tone to them sometimes. I'm not saying that we're doing that necessarily, but there's a tendency in our industry to kind of really focus on a lot of negativity. And it's not all that bad, is it? Otherwise we wouldn't all still be doing it, right?
You're right. I mean, everybody rolls their eyes at another election, don't they? But actually, a newsroom on election night is a marvellous place to be.
Who'd want to miss out on that? If you said who wants that night off, people would feel excluded, they'd feel shut out, they want to be there.
I think if I could look back at the first 20 years of my career, and hopefully there'll be another 20, but one of the things that I would sort of, if I could just lift myself up and observe, is the energy and the innovation that's been necessary because of the way the business model's been compromised by, you know, the shifting sands, the sheer level of creativity within the teams, as you say, those moments when, you know, somebody comes over and says, "Oh, we've done this and it's working," and you didn't really know that it was in its inception, never mind bloody published. Oh, great! And you know, we've had to give people the room to fail in order for them to be able to succeed, haven't we? And the amount of the energy, I think, and the innovation, the creativity that has been necessitated by the shifting sands, that's something we can all be pretty proud of, you know. And to your point, it's about the local paper and relationships. I think over my head, where I sit in the office, the founding statement of the Yorkshire Post is there, nailed to the wall from 1754. And it talks about purveying for the interest of the reader. You know, it's slightly archaic language, but it talks about stuff that will be of interest to the humble reader. That's kind of still what we do. In one of the last panels, do interesting stuff and you won't go far wrong. I think that's a pretty cool mantra, actually.
Can I ask if there are any questions in the audience? Because I've got some more, but I don't want to hog the discussion. So if you've got a question for what is frankly an expert panel, shove your hand up now and we'll get a microphone to you. Somebody at the back? Oh God, I'm so old.
Hi there, I'm Matt, I'm from News Associates and I'm a dreaded millennial, so I apologise. What do the panel think the next big technological development in news and media is?
Don't look at me.
A lot of people are talking about AI and machine learning at the minute. I think that's really interesting. BBC doing interesting things at the election. And it can be controversial. Shouldn't everything be done by human hands? I'm of the opinion that, certainly with automation as well, the more slick we can make, there's a lot of, pick up any newspaper and, any national newspaper today, and there'll be similar stories among all of them. Everyone gets excited about terms like commodity journalism, another big kind of wagging finger. It's telling your readers about stories that are the big ones of the day. You have to do a lot of stuff. The less time you can spend doing that, and the fewer people in your newsroom who are focused on stuff that is kind of reporting basic stories that are of interest to your readers, the better, because you can buy back that time and get them to do value additive, distinct, brilliant things that nobody else is doing. So I think that probably quite exciting for me at the minute is looking at how we just slicken up a lot of the stuff that we inevitably will do every day, and thereby buying back an enormous amount of time to do some really fun and distinctive things.
I think one thing I will say is what I've found really fascinating in the past year or so is how newsrooms have been looking at augmented reality and virtual reality. We've seen several pieces from people like The Guardian, The Economist, who've been trying to tell often quite challenging stories. For example, The Guardian did something, I think it was the day in the life of a refugee in the UK. And when you use VR and AR, you can't think of a more immersive or boots-on-ground experience than trying to get the reader into that person's shoes than using a system where you literally feel like you're there. And I think there's some really interesting pieces going on in that space. Obviously, we are in that space as well with Oculus, but I genuinely think it's a very, very interesting method of storytelling that I think increasingly we're going to see more around.
Any other questions? Doug, I saw your hand go up first. I'll come to you, and then Simon, and then at the front. Which kind of means that the microphone doesn't have to travel too far.
I'm Doug Wills, managing editor at the Evening Standard and with the Independent, but I'm also chair of London Press Club. On the diversity and the both women in journalism, particularly sport, and the wider diversity, there was a debate in this hall on sport generally, and we had a great audience and we had a decent panel. And I think zilch has happened as a result. My question to you is, how can we get the word out to getting people to apply? Because we've held schemes with apprentices for diversity, and it's across print and digital. But the biggest trouble is actually getting people to apply for jobs and actually wanting to come in. Once they come in, then we capture them. Do you have the same problem, or is it a London problem that we have?
Okay, before we answer that, do you want to pass the microphone forward, and I'll hear the other questions, and then we'll deal with those.
Yes, Simon Bucks. I understand that Facebook is not the platform of choice to younger people these days. Certainly my kids don't use it anymore. Is that an existential threat to Facebook, or is it going to be something like sort of gardening and real ale, people come to in later life?
Nothing wrong with gardening or real ale.
Probably Facebook groups for both, aren't there?
And absolutely.
Gardening
There are many
ale.
Facebook groups for both. Do you want me to go with that first? Or
I think there was a question at the front as well.
Yeah? The lady there.
Lady at the front.
Lady at the front? Yeah.
Michelle Edwards, Waltham Forest Echo. My question was for the Sun newspaper. You talked about your campaigns over the last year and so forth. Just want to get a sense of how you, other than the obvious, choose which campaigns you're going to back. Because I have one that I'd like you to back.
That's a great question. How do we choose campaign? Okay, so we've got diversity. How do we find people? Facebook under threat, which sounds like a headline in itself, and campaigns. So, diversity. How do we find people? Actually, James, I'm going to throw it to you.
It's not a London thing, far from it. So I look after 35 sports journalists for JPIMedia Yorkshire. Not one of them was a female at the time. So it's not a London thing, but I think there are really good reasons why sports teams churn people slowly, and that is the people who get those jobs have to fight bloody hard through the application process to get them in the first place. And quite often you find individuals on sports desks that they're doing their hobby and getting paid for it. They live and breathe sport, and they're brilliant writers, and the knowledge it runs really, really deep, and they care passionately and deeply. So when they get one of those jobs, the last thing they want to do is move on. And until The Athletic came in, actually, and disrupted our world significantly, there was very little churn on the sports desks, because they're quite a content bunch of journalists, really, that are happy in their lot. So how do we change the mix with such slow churning teams? I think one of the things we need is role models, and we need to do a better job of putting female sports writers at the forefront of our newsrooms and at the forefront of what we do. But it's going to take time, isn't it? It's hardly a quick fix, and again, with pressures on revenues and resource, it's tricky. But there are collaborations can be done. Talking to the Sports Writers Guild, there is definitely scope and room for a high-profile collaboration between. I won't share too much of what I'm trying to achieve, but with a large corporate, we're trying to forge an apprenticeship scheme where we can bring female sports writers on board and put them at the forefront of our newsroom. But there isn't an easy answer, I'm afraid. There isn't a quick fix, and it will take some smart people to make some bold decisions, I think.
Lucy, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I endorse that completely. I think one of the things is really proactively building your pipeline, finding younger talent maybe 2 or 3 stages out, and then really bringing them along, which is something you hopefully won't have to do forever, but right now you need special action, so that's what we have to do. I think the other thing I'm seeing, not particularly in sports, but in some of the interesting players, particularly in America, is like the way orchestras have blind auditions, so you play behind a screen so no one can see anything about your demographic makeup. Some of the more interesting, actually, pure players, digital pure players, are taking as much off the resumes as they can. They don't want to know what school you went to, they don't want to know your gender, they don't want to know your address. So really, and the first stage of this is working out what is the problem this individual has to solve, and what is the skill set. And starting with that, and then just really focusing after that. So taking away any sense of what kind of profile or background would deliver that skill set. And they're really finding some very interesting, diverse candidates. Without actually looking for diversity, the result of that process has been to deliver a much more diverse set of candidates.
I think from our experience working with the Facebook news reporters, the community news reporters, that's given people who would not assume that they could ever work in journalism a route to the newsroom. They're really supported. They've got all kinds of training going on. And I think that's made a difference in getting different voices into our newsrooms.
Yeah, and I think, and Will Gore from NCTJ will keep me honest here, but one of the most powerful things about that project is that we wanted to hit a 50% diversity data point, and we've actually managed to sail over that. I think we're at 59, possibly even more. So we've actually over-indexed on people from diverse socioeconomic, gender and other backgrounds, which has been very, very powerful. And as I said earlier, you've got people like Geeta and other community reporters who just simply, A, would not have had the ability to access that newsroom, and B, have the ability to tell the stories to the communities that normally would not have their stories told. So I think that's important.
And I'm just going to quickly go to the campaigns question, because the clock is making noises at me and Ian's eyebrows are raising.
The answer is there's no easy answer, but it has to fit a number of things. Is it on brand? I mean, is the first filter. The second filter is, does it have an audience? Is it sustainable? Because with digital campaigns, when I worked for newspapers, you could do a spread and a couple of spreads, and then that's it, job done. Campaign one or not. But in digital, to get cut through with some of these issues, amongst the flotsam and jetsam of sort of viral stories, if you like, it needs to be sustained over a long period of time. How they come to us and the ideas come to us, many different ways. Stop the Rip-Off campaign, where we outlawed sort of absorbent rents for these payday lenders, came to us via our consumer editor, who felt passionately about it. Stamp Out Slavery, which was, to get the law changed to extend help for modern slaves and support after they've been found, because they've been released back into society after 45 days, and guess what, they went back into slavery. That actually came to us from a visit to the office by the Co-op, who spend a huge proportion of their profits every year on social campaigning and research. So there was that. And then sometimes it's just, we get a sense of this is what's going on. And other times it's just a very passionate sell by an individual. So we'll speak afterwards.
Christian, just to finish on the campaigns point, you obviously, the Independent, led the climate change, now climate crisis kind of shift and awareness, and everybody else is now joining that. How do you spot right at the outset something like that is going to not be winnable in a quick move, but is important?
Yeah, fortunately there are these wonderful things called journalists who have fantastic instincts, and they're worth listening to. I mean, back in the day of the Indie, when there's that fantastic Thick of It scene where I think it's the night editor of the Mail is having his story changed from Malcolm Tucker endlessly, and he says, well, we can't just put a picture of a whale on the front with the headline cruelty, we're not the Independent. So there was a time when not everyone was quite with us on that subject. But we did it because the journalists who were on those areas were massively passionate about it, and try getting in the way of a journalist with a bit between their teeth. It's important. That's why connecting with those values drives everything for us. We had a similar experience with Final Say. We did that because there were a couple of particular people on the comment desk who were just really fired up about it, and it was at that point where all those the preparations were starting a couple of years ago. Was it the summer of, God, it all blurs into one now. Must have been the summer of 2017 when those stories about stockpiling became a big thing. And we just had lost faith that the end of it was going to be meaningful. And we didn't, to be honest, we didn't do any. It was a very quick thing to launch. We just instructed a cartoonist, wrote a leader, started a campaign on change.org. And it flew, and I think it flew because it was the right moment and it was incredibly passionate, and that's why we're in journalism, isn't it?
I think we'll end on that note. Thank you very much, panel. You've been superstars. I very much appreciate your time.